Good evening, everyone. I'm Carrie Weber. I'm the Executive Director of the Fairfield University Art Museum. Thank you all for coming tonight. It is our great pleasure and privilege to have Sean Kelly here with us this evening. Before I introduce him, I just want to remind you, well, first, I have to say, you guys did the right thing coming in person tonight. We live stream all of our programs that we can, and this program should be live streamed, but the internet has been out on campus all afternoon and it is still not back. So sadly, this program is not being live streamed, so your friends who thought they could stay home and watch it are not getting to see it. But it will be recorded, and they can watch it on our YouTube channel, probably Monday. So any of the programs relating to the Arthur Szyk exhibition, which is downstairs, which I hope you've had a chance to see, any of the programs you have not had a chance to see or don't have a chance to see in the future, because we have a whole bunch more coming along this fall, you can check out on the YouTube channel and watch them there. The exhibition is up till December 16th. I have exciting news to share that today the news embargo ended, and I am allowed to share it officially. We got a lovely grant from the Art Bridges Foundation, which is part of Crystal Bridges, Alice Walton's enterprise. It's called Access for All, and we are one of 64 museums that got money to make our museum more accessible. And we are using our money to be open on Thursday nights till 8 p.m. So our limited hours over the last 13 years of just Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to 4, are now increasing, and people who work will be able to come on Thursday nights till 8 o'clock. So your friends who haven't seen the Szyk exhibition, you can let them know they can do a date night on Thursday night and do something fun and come see the exhibition on a Thursday night. All right, without any further nonsense from me, I would like to introduce Sean. We're delighted. This is Sean's second appearance on behalf of the Fairfield University Art Museum. He was here, actually, I wish I had a glass to raise a toast to Ed Koren, the remarkable New Yorker cartoonist. We had a show of his work a bunch of years ago, and Sean came and did a program in conjunction with that exhibition. Ed Koren died this past year, but Sean Kelly is still very much with us, and we are so glad that he is back with us to talk about political cartoons in the context of Arthur Szyk. Sean Kelly is an award-winning illustrator and art director. He has produced thousands of illustrations for publications such as The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, Business Week, Rolling Stone, and The Atlantic. And his political commentary has appeared on the op-ed page of the New York Times. He recently designed and illustrated the book Stephen Colbert's Midnight Confessions for Simon & Schuster. I, for one, am so glad Stephen Colbert is back on the air. Sean has received honors from the Society of Illustrators, American Illustration, and the Society of Publication Designers. And in 2008, the National Cartoonist Society gave him the award for Best Illustrator. A graduate of Brown University who also studied at Rhode Island School of Design, Sean was a USC Annenberg Getty Arts Journalism Fellow in 2012, and his creativity seminar has been presented at universities, corporations, and the Columbia Journalism School. Please join me in welcoming Sean.
Thank you so much, Carrie, and thank you to Carrie Mack-Weber and the great staff, including Michelle DeMarzo. I feel very lucky to be here, and it's great to have all of you. I appreciate that you're here when it's otherwise gorgeously sunny outside, and I know that going into a dark room at the end of the afternoon could be a little bit tempting. There's a chance that somebody might fall asleep. So if I do happen to doze off, maybe you could throw something at me. I could use an iPhone 15. So now that we've got this beautiful technology here, great projector, great screen, I'm going to pull up a couple of slides. Let's see if this works. Okay, let's see if this works. No, I guess not. You know what it is? It's upside down. Let me see if I can fix that. Is that any better? All right, let's go to the next slide. This slide is one of the oldest slides that I've ever been associated with. It's from my childhood. I don't think I would fit in the slide anymore, a little bit too wide for that, but it's definitely one of my favorite old slides. This slide is a sign of a really good slide. I would say he's safe. This slide has a certain kind of sliditude, a kind of slidiosity of the slidification in the slide, and that's a good indicator for a good slide. And this slide is the political cartooning industry as it's been sliding downhill in recent decades. So just in the same way as there can be lots of different kinds of slides, there are lots of different kinds of symbols that are associated with words, that represent words, that stand for ideas, and that's what I'd love to talk with you about tonight. So welcome. This is a great event. I feel lucky to be here in conjunction with the Szyk exhibition and the other related Szyk events, but I'm worried that some of you may be here actually for a different Szyk event. I don't know if you were supposed to be up in Milford. There's another event going on tonight, so you could probably still make it if you wanted to just get on 95. But this is the more important Szyk. This is the exhibition In Real Times, Arthur Szyk, Artist and Soldier for Human Rights. And certainly with the international news this week, we need more soldiers for human rights. The title of my exhibition and my presentation was originally going to be Elephants, Donkeys, and Twitter Birds, and of course elephants representing the symbol for the Republican Party, donkeys representing the symbol for the Democratic Party, and Twitter Birds, which used to be a really important part of the political conversation, especially in the last 8 or 10 years. But because of the caprice of one individual, the bird is no longer. And it's kind of sad because you would imagine that it would last a little longer with all the work that the Twitter folks put into it. The original idea for Twitter, which I love, was actually on paper with a ballpoint pen on a legal pad. This was by Jack Dorsey, maybe before 2005 or so. And it was originally going to be called, you can see it up on the top left, it was originally going to be called my.stat.us, my status. This is how great ideas develop. I've always found that if I get stuck looking at my computer, looking at my phone, and I can't think of an idea, I switch over to writing on paper, and suddenly the ideas flow. And I really recommend this to all of you. One of the great things that all the folks at Twitter put into their planning was playing with different ideas of what this symbol, this now late symbol, would be. And take a look at all the variations they put together. There it is. And even the exact final version of this digital image was very well executed. All these individual circles represent different aspects of the design that perfectly match a perfect circle, and using all these different elements to build that one icon, which is now gone. So my first editorial cartoon when I was in elementary school was a real thrill for me. I don't have the actual one here, but I am able to replicate it. Do you remember when we were in elementary school, we'd have these sheets of paper where at the top was this nice big open space, and the bottom were lines on which we would write our story, and there were dotted lines, so we'd make sure that the lowercase letters lined up nicely. So I was so excited because to me, this is what I do for a living now. People write words on the bottom, and I come up with images that go with those words. And I feel so lucky to still do what I did when I was 5 years old. So the assignment that I got from my teacher in elementary school was to come up with an image that would represent just a single word. And that word was freedom. And so I thought about it for a little bit, and I said, I think I've got an idea. So I made this. And I thought, I feel pretty good about that. So I wrote my name, wrote the word down at the bottom, my indication of the word freedom. And this kid in my class comes up to me. He takes the crayon out of my hand and goes up to my sheet of paper. And on the bottom of my sheet of paper, he made this. And that kid was Elon Musk. And you can see that there's even the X in his eye right there. So even back then, he was focused on killing birds. But I'm so lucky to be here at the beautiful Pellermine Hall at Fairfield University and the Fairfield University Art Museum. As Carrie said, I was here back in 2016 when Edward Corrin and also the great art director of the New Yorker magazine, Lee Lorenz, were here, and I felt very fortunate to be a part of that. I have also created a creativity seminar where I talk to different groups at corporations and universities, and so I've lectured at different locations, but maybe you've seen the TED Talks online. I haven't done a TED Talk, but I've done kind of the lower version of that, more like the junior varsity version of a TED Talk. And so that was just a short while ago that I did that. I'm here to talk about symbols, and symbols are very simple things, but we might as well figure out what's the actual definition of a symbol. So to get a good definition, we should go to, of course, Webster's dictionary. And Webster's dictionary is, of course, a last-minute resource for lame speakers desperately seeking an introduction for their presentations, which is exactly what I'm doing right now. But symbols are really just a representation of something else, something that stands in for something, something that takes the place of something. Very often it's an image standing for words, but it could be other words. It could be a single word, a phrase, an icon that helps to communicate things in new ways, but hopefully simpler ways. If a symbol is really simple, it can be extremely powerful. Political symbols are all over the place. We all are so familiar with these icons that have developed in the 20th century, even the 19th century, and they get complicated. But this whole history of political symbols and symbols in general for communication go way back even before written language. Of course, hieroglyphics were some of the very first symbols because it's telling stories with pictures. This is before written language. So this was the way people communicated. And even King Tut, even though he was the boy king they called him, he had a way of doing these hieroglyphics, but because he was so young, they were a little more childlike, even more childish. These were the kind of hieroglyphics that he used back then. So, and I hope that any of you, if you want to like this presentation on social media today, I would love that. Thank you. So the first political cartoon published in America is one you might be familiar with. It's by Ben Franklin. He was, of course, a great statesman, diplomat, inventor, writer, great humorist, really funny gentleman, and also was involved in so many different inventions. He invented the $100 bill, which people might be not familiar with. And also, he was recently featured in a very prominent Broadway musical. I don't know if any of you saw Franklin at all, and that's him with the key and the kite there. But he noticed, even though this map is from a much later period, he noticed when he looked at the early colonies running up the coast of America, not yet America, the coast of the new land and the Atlantic Ocean, he saw a shape, and he immediately focused on this shape. And he realized that the shape could tell a story. And that's one of the great things about visual communication, is if you can find a shape that's inherently connected to the subject matter, it can do all the work for you. So he realized the shape felt like a snake. And yet, he realized that like a snake, if you cut it up, it's going to perish. So this was the very first political cartoon published in America, and it only includes down to South Carolina, and New England is just a little bit nebulous. We got stuck in there somewhere around the head. But the sad fact is that people misinterpret this sometimes. And in recent years, people have been using this symbol in ways that are very different from what Ben Franklin intended. This was from a Tea Party rally maybe 15 years ago, and some of these folks didn't realize exactly what Ben Franklin's original intent was, or the whole purpose of staying together rather than breaking apart. And some of their other signs were also a little bit out of touch. But you'll see other snakes, like the Ben Franklin snake, in the great exhibition downstairs. Arthur Szyk used wonderful symbols, animals, as icons, and I love the idea of a pattern on the body of the reptile that has that dramatic icon spreading through it. And somebody here at the Fairfield Art Museum made an excellent point this week that considering the news around the world, that the word madness may be not so much about something from the 1940s, but very relevant to today. The national bird is another great symbol. Of course, we're all familiar with the bald eagle. Ben Franklin was considering the bald eagle, but he had another idea. Even though the bald eagle is, of course, to us, unmistakable, what could be better than that? Ben Franklin thought that maybe it should be a turkey. He thought it was a very majestic bird. He thought it had great personality. It was kind of a new part of life in this new world. But unfortunately, turkey was already taken by another place, and so that was not available for us to use that. But the two symbols that we're most familiar with, the Republican elephant and the Democratic donkey, were invented by one political cartoonist in the mid-19th century, Thomas Nast, who realized that it was the shape of the animal, but also the characteristic of the animal. In this case, he decided to label a donkey because of its kicking motion. The characteristic property of an animal can kind of become its personality. So it was only because of this particular cartoon where he felt that the kicking motion was something that was tied to a particular animal that he made the symbol donkey for the Democrats. And it had existed in a little bit of a way earlier before that, but he was really one who made that his own. Similarly, the Republican elephant was based on a cartoon where it's more about just the physical property of a large animal just barreling through. It wouldn't make sense if that metaphor for a donkey, but the large animal just, breaking his way through was the first time that the Republican label was put on an elephant. So they lasted as friends through the early 20th century. Here they are at a fishing pole together. And in the 1960s, this is a shot of a bunch of future candidates. This is testing the heartbeat of America. Down at the bottom is Ronald Reagan. This is from '64, but he later would be, of course, president. Up on the left is Nelson Rockefeller, George Romney, father of Mitt Romney, Richard Nixon, and down on the bottom is George Wallace. But so the two symbols for the two animals were really prominent for a very long time and still are. And even Herb Bloch in the 1950s played with the idea of how many different ways can you draw an elephant to suggest that the notion of a modern republicanism is a little bit hard to decipher. So he showed a scene at an art gallery. So anyway, this was a notion of the art gallery as a venue for showing all different kinds of elephants. There's a Whistler's mother. There's a kind of abstract Cubist elephant, old Stone Age style. So that was a fun way for Herb Bloch to use that. I did a drawing for the New York Times about what was then called the Party of No, the notion that Republicans were being very obstructionist. So I realized that there was an opportunity to use the trunk and the tusk. And for a story about compassionate conservatism, I realized that the letters GOP could create the shape of an elephant also. And a friend of mine, David Souter, did this fun cartoon about Republicans trying to pick their nominee, and you made a great analogy of pinning the tail on the donkey. But I love the fact that the Democrats are apparently okay with having a particular kind of name for a donkey still out there. You wouldn't want them to have this kind of reputation at all. But I'd much rather see it be a strong, strong animal like this one, for instance. But Thomas Nast also created the modern-day version of Santa Claus, the modern-day version of Uncle Sam, and this guy. But the Uncle Sam had existed for a little bit before that in the late 1700s, but it was really Thomas Nast who gave it its personality. The notion of Uncle Sam being tall and skinny, having a beard, having that kind of wizened expression. And he could also be fat, if that's what the metaphor called for, the idea of a bloated government. And of course, this is the most famous image of Uncle Sam from a recruitment for World War I. But as a contrast, during the Vietnam War, Mad Magazine put their own spin on it. And even if you have a striped hat and a blue and white gown, you could feel like you're Uncle Sam, no matter who you are. I did a drawing once which was about counting votes for the national elections, and I realized that the stripes in both his pants and his hat was an opportunity to do that kind of hash mark of counting up to 5. So that was my opportunity to do that, and that was on the op-ed page of the New York Times. But Thomas Nast is also famous for another symbol that has become so familiar, a $sign on a bag of money. And what I love is at the very bottom part of the $sign, it's like the little lower end of his nose. It's just beautifully rendered. But that symbol continues today, of course, for Monopoly. And even a recent issue of The Economist shows bags and bags of money with $signs. And I was thinking, if I had bags of money, I don't think I would want to put $signs on it. I'd maybe label it a little bit differently. Or maybe I'd put those stink lines that cartoonists put on things just to keep everyone away from it. And labeling things became such a natural part of political cartooning, especially in the 50s. This is a drawing of John Foster Dulles, who was Secretary of State in the late 40s, who had this notion that bringing the country to the brink of war could actually help us. And so he even labeled the cliff the brink, which is a little heavy-handed. I don't think people like to do that anymore. But similarly, when the fall of the Soviet Union occurred, lots of cartoonists were really left for a loss because a lot of the great icons, phrases, and images that they had used to depict the Soviet Union were now gone. A great cartoonist named Jim Borgman showed this scene in a cartoonist's office where he's realizing that everything that he depended on is being taken away from him. He's terrified. So the labels, "We will bury you," calling people commies, and all those captions were gone forever. The KGB, the arms race, the USSR, evil empire, all these opportunities were gone forever, and that was pretty daunting for cartoonists. But a lot of these symbols still remain, even from the year 1930. And I love this cartoon because it's got so many different cliches going on in it. Often the top right corner is the New Year, a little boy. He's wearing a top hat. So that's that classic cliche for a rich guy, successful guy, top hat. And he's getting rid of the old year, 1929, who is wearing a barrel. And a barrel is such a bizarre idea to us today because, of course, nobody uses barrels for anything anymore, but it was a common icon for being out of money. And yet, it continues today. This even a fairly recent cartoon, still using a barrel. So some of these symbols really survive, even though they're completely irrelevant. And they even exist, and they're funnier sometimes in real life. I always feel like cartoon ideas are actually better if you can act them out in person, because then they bring it to a whole different level. The American flag, of course, is one of the most obvious icons of our world, and Arthur Szyk uses American icons like that beautifully in his work. You should go down and take a look at the amazing ways that he uses these classic icons to tell his stories. And the old story is that Betsy Ross was the one who created this flag. And it's actually an amazing piece of communication because, of course, there are 13 stripes. So it's almost like she was an accountant. She was telling a story with a piece of cloth. She's letting us know how many colonies are there. So she really was like an accountant. And it was shortly after that that she invented the pocket pen protector. But today, the United States flag is really like an informational graphic. It's providing so much information, the 13 original colonies and the 50 states. There are very few other flags around the world that do that. Some flags like to keep it simpler, even though the American flag has become such an icon that the painter Jasper Johns has used it repeatedly. And this particular painting sold at Christie's in the year 2009 for $28.6 million. But I happen to like the simplicity of this flag. I had an assignment in college as a design student to prove that color exists. So I knew I needed to do something that would show that it was necessary to have color. And I was thinking about the similarity between a lot of other flags. The flag of Italy, France, Ireland. Italy is green, white, red. France is blue, white, red, and Ireland is green, white, orange. But I was thinking, what if we didn't have color? Wouldn't it get awfully confusing because they end up being all the same? So that, for me, was a proof that color exists, that if we can't have color, we can't have any clarity. The other assignment that I tried, and the other solution I came up with was focusing more on the exists part of that challenge and thinking about existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre, I came up with, I'm pink, therefore I am. But colors are symbols too, and we can associate so many things with different colors that automatically come to mind. Like, for instance, red. We think of passion or energy or anger, or heat, blood, fire engines, Coca-Cola, China, and the red states here in this country. For blue, we think about the ocean, the sky, a baby boy, the Virgin Mary. Jet blue, feeling sad is blue. And for yellow, there's sunshine, there's joy, there's cowardice or fear. If you're feeling like a coward, sometimes people call you yellow. School buses, raincoats. So all of these particular colors connote different moods, different emotions, different feelings. Another one would be green, which makes you think of nature or healing, but also greed. You're green with envy, or green also suggests someone who's brand new. And then there's orange. But red and blue are the signs and the colors that we now associate with our particular parties. But that is only a recent development. As closely as back as 1976, the colors were switched. When Jimmy Carter was running against Gerald Ford, all the TV networks and all the newspapers referred to the Democrats as red and the Republicans as blue. But somehow it all solidified around 2000, along with the hanging chads. But at this time, NBC News had this massive map that they created in their studio, this colossal thing. It was actually the same studio where Saturday Night Live is also filmed. But this was the first time that anyone produced this colossal map. And you can see that this shows early tallies for Carter and Ford. Carter, of course, would have won Georgia down on the bottom right, and it's colored red. And he also would have won Massachusetts and Minnesota, and those are colored red. So back then, it was flipped around completely. One thing that I really love about the exhibition downstairs is they provide for you magnifying glasses, because the work of Arthur Szyk is so beautifully detailed. He's a real artful miniaturist, and having these tools allow us to see things so much clearer. But sometimes the subtle symbols are tough to understand, and we really have to pay attention to them. There used to be a period in the 60s and 50s with advertising where subliminal messages were included in advertisement. You'd have to look to see if, ice cubes in a glass actually had some hidden image. But the thing about subliminal messages is you don't realize that they're actually happening because they're somehow in the background. But when they're secretly fed to you by somebody and you're not quite sure if you saw it or not, it really can have a big impact on your mind. But the symbols at the very top of our keyboard are some of the most iconic symbols and most frequently used symbols, and they're all available for us, and we use them all the time. The great Mort Walker, who was a creator of Beetle Bailey and the comic strip Hi and Lois, realized that all those symbols didn't really have a name. So he produced an entire vocabulary. He called it the Lexicon of Comicana. And he was able to come up with these beautiful, surreal and hilarious names for all these visual icons that none of us had been aware of, but he created this entire language. Like, for instance, if you're not sure what the sweats of perspiration coming from a man's head are, those are called ploods. So just for future reference. And we're grateful to have Brian Walker, son of Mort Walker, with us tonight. So Mort Walker created this whole iconography and an entire book, which is still very useful, and he invented all these goofy and funny and very clever names. But the most familiar one that we see most often is this curse word, because we're not allowed to say that in polite family publications. And each of the symbols is kind of unique. The first one, of course, the @ sign, we're really familiar with in a way that we were not 35 years ago. The @ sign is very familiar to us now. It's not merely what it used to be, but now we use it in a whole new way. And the second symbol is a little bit more confusing. This is a Halloween costume. You imagine that it was advertised as like sexy punctuation mark. But it's confusing because I always thought this was not only a tic-tac-toe board, but it was either the pound sign that you see at the bottom of your phone or a hashtag. And it's confusing, but I think there was actually a big battle between the two. Was it going to be hashtag or pound sign? And hashtag got a pretty good start. That pound sign came right behind it, figured out a better way to do it. Hashtag went immediately to the middle. Pound sign made a good turn to the left, and hashtag finally made it through and won. So apparently hashtag is the winner in that debate. And that's probably what hashtag said afterwards. The great thing about Arthur Szyk, one of the many, many great things about him, is how he connects the modern world of the 20th century to antiquity and to the Renaissance and to worlds centuries before him. On the right is a beautiful painting by Arthur Szyk. On the left is a painting by Hans Holbein, perhaps 300-400 years before. And he really carried on great traditions, even though some people see him as an illustrator. He was, of course, a very fine artist and carried on the tradition of old painting. When I see Arthur Szyk's work, I also think of some of his contemporaries, a great cartoonist illustrator, George Grosz, who was around Germany and Europe around the same time, who has a lot of the same kind of characters and dynamic and just the feeling of this whole new world that existed in the early 20th century. And beautiful work. Also, I think about an extraordinary magazine called Simplicissimus, which was published in Germany all through the early 20th century and the Weimar period, but it has a lot of the same feeling that Arthur Szyk picked up on later and carried to all new levels. And in more recent times, the extraordinary political cartoonist Pat Oliphant certainly carries on the tradition of Arthur Szyk. He's got that feeling for caricature and the craziness of animals, the craziness of politics. And this was a drawing he did immediately after 9/11, when he knew that America was going to get to work. History has a lot of great examples of political icons. Of course, Mount Rushmore is almost a surreal thing. It's almost impossible to believe that it really exists. And one thing that I always think about is Teddy Roosevelt, third from the left, had only died 8 years before this began construction in the year 1927. So if we could imagine a colossal monument to somebody who had only been alive 8 years before, it's a little bit out of proportion. I don't know if you've seen it in person, but it's actually even a better view from behind. I don't know if you've noticed that before. And way back in history, these kind of political caricatures, political icons, real memorials to leaders and even living leaders. It took place with Alexander the Great. In fact, these coins that depicted him were called, in a Greek term, Alexanders, because they were so familiar to see that strong face like that. And he was extremely popular at the time. Alexander the Great was so popular that hats were made in his honor just to commemorate his greatness. But today, there's a whole group of new political cartoonists because really the old world has changed. I made a drawing for the Los Angeles Times a while ago, 20 years ago, about the notion that the print newspaper was really dying. And I felt there was a nice opportunity to play with the similarity of those two words. These two guys are really the new political cartoonists. They really have taken over that whole realm of dialogue, commentary, critique in a funny way. This is from maybe 25 years ago when Daily Show first began in 1999. Yeah, a quarter of a century ago. Here they are today, still doing very, very well. But they really completely changed the whole dialogue. What was really unique was Jon Stewart on the right was, I think, the best example of satire, but Stephen Colbert on the left, I think, is the best example of parody, which is different. You know, Jon Stewart is making fun of the other person, that's satire. But Stephen Colbert, and the old character that he used to do on his show, The Colbert Report, was being the person that he's making fun of, and that's a great definition of parody. So who are the new, or what are the new political cartoons right now? Well, it's sad to say they're not in newspapers the way they used to be. It's even a little bit watered down on television because it's mostly just the late night hosts goofing it up. But the place where people today most often find their political commentary is in memes. And that's where people get their information, that's where they get their commentary, that's where they share ideas. So that's the new world of political commentary. A sad thing was announced just this past July. 3 Pulitzer-winning cartoonists were let go all at once. These newspapers feel like they don't need that. I think a lot of them are afraid of getting commentary from their readers. If a strong stance is taken on a political page, in a cartoon, the publications get so much feedback, they get angry letters. These days, even worse. A lot of political cartoonists have even been faced with death threats, which is really horrible. So, as a response, a lot of newspapers have become much more tepid, much more mild in the type of thing that they editorialize on. Difficult topics are really tough for cartoonists whose initial instinct is to make fun of something, to find a laugh. But when it's something very serious, it gets much more tricky. In 2011, when Osama bin Laden was killed, a bunch of newspapers and magazines wanted to have a cover image that summed up that disappearance, that death. And it's surprising that a few of them actually came up with things that were very similar, very much along the same lines. But you could tell that they were struggling with it just a little bit. There are some topics for which there are no words, and of course this week has been horrific around the world, and it's tough for anyone to say anything that can be of any help, and for cartoonists it's very difficult to come up with something that's meaningful. Mike Lukovich, a great cartoonist in Atlanta, did a drawing which is a little bit of a cliche, I have to admit. You know, the teardrop is something that might have existed back in the 50s, but you could tell he was struggling with it. Like, what could you possibly do on a page that's supposed to have some humor and that's supposed to have, a feeling of thinking of things in new ways when you're all of us are so brought back to tears. But he tried another approach, which I thought was really admirable. He took a different tack, and instead of focusing on the loss, he focused on what Americans and leaders in America could be doing instead. So he began by showing 2 hands in water, drowning. So that's a metaphor, that's an analogy. Israel and Ukraine. They're hoping to be saved, you imagine, but you're wondering, where are the lifeguards? And they're up there, beating each other up. So that was an example of how you can make a statement about the need for help, even if it's tough to make a statement about the people who are suffering so much. And of course, Arthur Szyk was very good at this too. Here he is with the dove, the white dove for peace, one of the great classic icons or symbols of used in political cartoons. And look at all the beautiful detail he put into the ornament and the medals and the honors on the general, which I think make him look even more like a buffoon. There are times when you really feel sad, and this, of course, is one of the weeks, but also back in 2014, cartoonists for the humor magazine in France, in Paris, called Charlie Hebdo, were killed. 12 people were killed, 11 were injured by terrorists who stormed their offices. It's one of the most popular magazines in Europe. It's always very fun. It's kind of like a combination of Mad Magazine or the Colbert Report, just wacky, extreme commentary. But, as part of free speech, they are allowed to say what they should and what they can. But it was a very, very sad day. And the other publications started to try to respond to their sadness for the loss of this French group of satirists. And it's a tough thing to make a poignant image that doesn't feel too cliched. But this is one of the best, by Kevin Pope, and using a nice pun to show the irony. But sometimes a symbol is only a symbol. If people take symbols too seriously, that makes dangerous things for everybody. And unfortunately, it happens too often. As René Magritte said in this painting, which translates as, "This is not a pipe." Of course, it's not a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe. And that's a difficult line that cartoonists have to draw, literally, when people take their things too literally. There was a Danish cartoonist in the year 2006 named Kurt Westergaard, and he was asked by a newspaper in Denmark to make a drawing of the Prophet Muhammad. So Kurt Westergaard, a Danish cartoonist, was asked by a newspaper to make a drawing of the Prophet Muhammad. He did. He followed that assignment. It caused an international outcry, and he received death threats. But to me, the most surprising thing was, in my experience, I've never known of a cartoonist who's made a profit. The greatest tool for a cartoonist in caricaturing political figures is to find that one characteristic. What's the one part of that person that really is so unique to them that as soon as you put it in your drawing, people know who you're drawing? Beautiful drawing by Arthur Szyk downstairs of the great Franklin Delano Roosevelt and that iconic cigarette holder, which no one had before and no one has had since. So he really used that tool as a device. Even the smoke rises up in the shape of the letter V, so he's getting twice his money for that nice prop there. But for Richard Nixon, it was the nose. That's what cartoonists always seem to focus on. And a great Robert Grossman cover for National Lampoon was actually a fold-out cover. When you opened the cover and went inside, you saw that there was Jiminy Cricket as Henry Kissinger. So the other characteristic properties of some great presidents have been Jimmy Carter's smile. When Carter was first elected in 1980, Mike Peters created this cartoon. And that was a really perfect combination of the thing that's most unique about the person and the place they represent. And for Reagan, it was the hair. And for Obama, it was the ears. And for, well, he's got a lot going for him there. That's what I'd say. But the tricky thing is we don't yet have an icon yet for the current president. I don't think people have really captured what he does and captured up with him yet. But he's tough to draw, I have to admit. He doesn't have the kind of face that lends itself to something like that. But I think making fun about people's age is not a useful tool. It's kind of a cheap shot for cartoonists. There's only 3 years difference between these two potential frontrunners. And in fact, Ronald Reagan, back in '84, made a joke. He said, "I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience." So that opponent was Walter Mondale, who wasn't all that young, but he had been vice president, so he did have some experience. But if you look at the logo for Biden, there are a couple of fun things going on. I really like the use of the letter E here and the waving flag. You always want to have some kind of reference to the flag to make it really strong. And if we just zero in just on the flag itself, the letter E, we realize that it's so well put together that other people thought it was pretty good too. In fact, somebody else thought, I'm going to use that as well. And so now that you've seen this, you'll never be able to unsee that. So I guess that that's the best form of a compliment, is to imitate. And photo ops are an opportunity for a candidate to look strong, but they can also be disastrous if a political cartoonist can make fun of it. When Michael Dukakis wore a helmet in a tank, it pretty much sunk his campaign. Similarly, in 1965, when Lyndon Baines Johnson showed off the scar from his gallbladder surgery, it became this perfect opportunity for a great caricaturist named David Levine, who used the shape of the scar as the outline of the country of Vietnam. And it was really a perfect way to take advantage of someone trying to look strong, but in fact looking very weak. Government symbols are, of course, the easy way is to make a just simple line drawing, and you automatically can suggest justice or the Supreme Court, and then you can add other things to it to bring it to life. The Statue of Liberty, of course, can be drawn very simply, and even more simply if you just focus on the top of the crown and the spikes, as long as it doesn't start to look like this and those spikes. And easy symbols like the Capitol building, the White House, and the Supreme Court, just very simple symbols. The more simple they are, the more iconic they are. I had an assignment a while ago to show that the Supreme Court was actually very much of an activist court. So I pretended to show a page in like a school book about government and just used the same photograph each time. I also had another assignment about digital privacy, and I realized that there are other black and white symbols that are really simple, really connected to what suggests digital and what suggests privacy. So I realized there was a chance to show that there were forces out there that were kind of taking away our identity. Some other powerful symbols are ones that Arthur Szyk put together. Of course, he used the swastika repeatedly on the beautiful decorations of all the caricatures that he's created here. And the swastika itself is a very problematic image. A lot of people say that it looks like it's tipping over, that if you look at the shoulder sleeve of the Hitler there, you know, the swastika is tipping over. It's almost destined to fall. And a great political cartoonist named Fitzpatrick used that notion of forward motion of the swastika to show the Nazis rolling into Poland. And that was a very, very powerful image. But one of the best ways to make fun of people is to make them look like idiots. So Saul Steinberg created this drawing where he showed somebody having a lot of trouble getting it right. And that's one of the best things you can do to make some fun of someone. The great thing about Hitler is, as an image, there is that mustache. But thank God, there's also somebody else who had that mustache. And what opposites they are. And yet, remarkably, in the year 1940, Charlie Chaplin did a film shortly after a lot of smart people were leaving Europe, but before Charlie Chaplin knew the horrors of the concentration camp. There's a quote downstairs with the exhibition in which Chaplin says in his 1964 autobiography, "If I had known about the concentration camps, there's no way I could have made that film." But he did a beautiful thing with it. It's a kind of Prince and the Pauper story because along with portraying the dictator who has the name Adenoid Hinkle, from some unnamed country that has a symbol that looks a little bit like a swastika. There's also a character he plays, which is a Jewish barber who gets caught up in the melee, and stormtroopers come to take over his business. And he later becomes the doppelganger or the replacement for the Fuhrer. And it's a brilliant story, a beautiful movie. And I want to show you a little bit of a clip that to me is just so poetic. It's just about 2 minutes. I hope the music comes on. It's the music from the Prelude to Lohengrin, which is maybe coincidentally by Wagner, but I hope you enjoy this.
Yes, dictator of the world. We'll start with the invasion of Austerlitz. After that, we won't have to fight, we can bluff. Nation after nation will capitulate. Within 2 years, the world will be under your thumb.
Leave me. I want to be alone. Out Caesar, out Nolus, Emperor of the world. My word.
I cannot top that. For the humor, for the poetry, for the commentary, I hope you enjoy that. And please go see again and again the exhibition downstairs. It's really extraordinary. Thank you for being here tonight.